Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm here to talk to you about all the books I read in February. I read about 10 books, which is a more than reasonable amount of books to read in 1 month. But the only important thing is that most of the books I read in February were great. And that to me is what makes a successful reading month. As usual, most books I read were novels, but I also read one play and even one children's book. But let's get started with the novels. Now, I did not know anything about Visitation by Jenny Erpenbeck when I picked it up. Visitation is a German contemporary novel which was first published in 2008. I believe it came out in English back in 2010. Visitation achieves to cover some of the most important political events of the 20th century in just a few pages. One of the most remarkable things about Visitation is how short it is. In a non-linear way, the novel covers the Third Reich, the liberation after World War II, and the German Democratic Republic that followed in the East. But how does Erpenbeck manage to pack so much in? In Visitation, she concentrates on one specific location, which is a house and its surrounding grounds by an unnamed lake in Brandenburg. The property is owned by a Jewish family who are forced to sell it by the Nazi government. Then an architect buys the house and renovates it. At the end of World War II, the Russian army takes possession of the house. Then, under the German Democratic Republic, the house goes back to the architect. And although he then has to leave it because he got involved in some illegal businesses in the West. Now, Visitation is a troubling read, but for the book to have the impact it is meant to have, I think you'll need to possess a clear sense of all the changes Germany, particularly East Germany, went through in the 20th century. Many of the characters in this novel, most of them unnamed, occupied the house by the lake at different times. There is only one constant human presence, the gardener. In fact, the gardener connects all the different sections told from the point of view of the other characters. To me, one of the most unsettling things about Visitation is in fact the constant presence of that gardener. No matter what is happening politically and socially in Germany, the gardener is always there, pragmatically laboring away. Now, in this novel, not all the characters are unnamed. There are a few exceptions, but the exceptions to this self-imposed rule by Erpenbeck are key. So whenever a character is given an actual name, it is for a powerful reason. For example, Doris, who is one of the Jewish occupants of the house by the lake, has a whole chapter devoted to her. And that chapter alone is one of the most powerful pieces of writing I have ever encountered. Visitation is only about 150 pages long, but it is one of the most distinctive books I've read in many years. Now, my next book is also German, and coincidentally, it was also published in 2008. Broken Glass Park is the debut novel by the Russian-born German writer Alina Bronsky. Broken Glass Park is a first-person narrative told by a 17-year-old Russian immigrant, Sasha Nyman. Sasha lives with her two younger siblings, Anton and Elisa, and a distant relative, Maria, in a public house project called the Emerald. Now, Sasha must deal with the trauma caused by the murder of her mother and her mother's boyfriend. They were both killed by Sasha's stepfather, Vadim, who is now in prison paying for the crime. So what happens is that one day, Sasha becomes rightfully enraged when she reads an article on a local newspaper, and that article is sympathetic to Vadim. Frustrated by the life she was forced to live, Sasha takes refuge with an older man, Volker, who lives with his son Felix. Felix, who is about Sasha's age, is chronically ill. So why Broken Glass Park? Well, the Broken Glass Park of the title makes reference to a wooded area near the projects where one of the key episodes of the novel takes place. Broken Glass Park is peppered with bleak yet touching episodes. It is a remarkable debut, and the best thing about it, I think, is the character of Sasha and how Bronsky manages to capture the teenage rage she more than justifiably feels. After reading Broken Glass Park, I knew I wanted to read more from Alina Bronsky, so I've now picked up her novel Baba Dunia's Last Love, but I'm not done with that one yet. So, you know, all these German novels were buddy reads, and that definitely enriched my experience. I think I will most definitely continue to read more from Bronsky and from Erpenbeck in the next few months. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know in the comment section down below. Next, I have a play. Blood Wedding, or Bodas de Sangre, is one of the most famous plays by Spanish playwright Federico García Lorca. He wrote it in 1932 and it premiered in Madrid the following year. I've never seen any of Lorca's plays on the stage, which is a shame. And you know, before I picked up Blood Wedding, I had only read his other play, The House of Bernarda Alba. Blood Wedding is a powerful tragedy whose ending is perfectly foreshadowed from Act 1. The place is rural Andalusia in southern Spain. The characters are archetypes of country folk involved in a bloody feud. Blood Wedding is an ostensibly simple play, jam-packed with symbolism. It is a powerful read, and I can only imagine how much more powerful it would be to see a good stage production of it. Now let's go from the south of Spain to the very north, the Basque Country. In February, I read two contemporary books by two Basque writers. The first one was Mejor la ausencia by Edurne Portela, which was also a body read. This book is a Bildungsroman that centers on the character of Amaya, who grows up in a working-class neighborhood in the 1980s. The whole book is told by Amaya, who is only a young child at the beginning of the novel. In the first few chapters, the reader is able to work out what is happening way before Amaya herself realizes. But as the novel goes on and Amaya grows up, we realize that perhaps she did know a lot more, a whole lot more in fact, but as a child she was just not able to express it. Fortunately, years go by quickly in the narrative, and soon Amaya is mature enough to give us a coherent narrative of what being a teenager living in the Basque Country was like at the time. This novel does not beat us on the head with political violence or the ravages of drug addiction in marginalized areas of society, but all those elements are present throughout the book. Amaya, like Sasha in Broken Glass Park, must come to terms with trauma. Both novels have great endings, and both characters finally find a way to deal with their pasts. The other Basque book I read is a collection of short stories entitled Uncorazon demasiado grande by Eider Rodriguez. She originally wrote these short stories in the Basque language, and they first came out in several different collections, but this is the first time that Spanish readers can read her stories. And you know, as with most collections of this kind, I found the material irregular, but overall I found Eider's voice to be refreshing and original. These two books are not available in English yet, and I don't know if there will ever be, so let's move on to books that are actually available in English. I had never read anything by the Irish writer Edna O'Brien. I've been meaning to read her Country Girls trilogy for many years, but then late last year she published a new novel that has received some critical acclaim. So in February I picked up Girls by Edna O'Brien. This novel is a fictionalized account of the abduction of a group of schoolgirls by the jihadist group Boko Haram in Nigeria back in 2014. I still remember seeing that in the news, so I was curious to read this novel, although I had also some trepidation. Because I had never read anything by O'Brien before, I did not know quite what to make of Girls. What I mean is that I don't know how similar it is to her previous books, or if it is a departure for her in any way. I got the impression that Girls is quite experimental, but then I could be totally wrong. One thing that I was curious about was how the Irish writer would tackle this very Nigerian narrative. As I read, I kept wondering if a Nigerian writer would have done it differently, and also I asked myself, what possessed O'Brien to choose this kidnapping as her subject matter? Don't get me wrong, I strongly believe that any writer of any background is free to write about anything he or she chooses. But that does not mean that the result is always going to be good. In this case, I just don't know what to think. What I do know is that Girls is a compact book, often written with lyrical prose, but which depicts some horrifying, truly horrifying events. Now I'm even more curious to read more O'Brien's book, and I think the Country Girl trilogy, which is set in Ireland, is next for me. Well, February was an eclectic month for me. You can probably tell that already because of the books I have talked about in this video. And the next few books I'll talk about will only further confirm that. I don't really read children's or YA books, but last month I read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by Frank L. Baum. This is a classic, of course, of American children's literature, but you know, like most people, I was only familiar with the 1939 movie adaptation starring Judy Garland. I think what prompted me to finally read the book was actually watching the movie again for the umpteenth time. There are some key differences between the movie and the book. I was already aware of most of them because I picked, because I've read about it. For instance, I knew that the ruby slippers are an invention of NGM to make the most of a Technicolor, but that in the book, the shoes that the Good Witch of the North gives Dorothy are actually silver. Now, although the plot is largely the same, there are some episodes and characters in the book that do not feature in the movie. So that made reading the book entertaining enough for me. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is often hailed as the one truly American fairy tale. The book is the first in a long series. I think there are a total of 14 books written by Frank L. Baum himself, plus other stories written by other writers. I don't know, to be honest, if I'll continue with the series, but I'm glad I finally read the first book. And if The Wizard of Oz is a book for readers of all ages, I think only adults should read Death with Interruptions by José Saramago. The novel has the following premise. What would happen if one day, without any warning, people stopped dying? Of course, people would continue to get sick, but no one would actually die. In his novel, Saramago imagines what would happen. The consequences would be far-reaching. The interruption of dying would impact the economy. You know, there is a whole industry that relies on people constantly dying, funeral homes, the insurance business. And how about healthcare? Could the system cope with an ever-aging population that never dies? Would the absence of death change our morals? Wouldn't the absence of mortality change how we think about ourselves and what makes us human? And what about religion, particularly Christianity? Without death, could the church still talk about heaven and hell? These practical matters and ethical issues that such an event would raise are dealt with in the first part of Saramago's novel. But as fascinating as all of those macro issues are, and they truly are fascinating, to me the book got truly compelling in the second part, where Saramago zooms in the character of a musician. And I'm not going to tell you anything else about the plot because that would spoil your reading experience. I am a fan of Saramago's writing and I'm slowly making my way through his books. Not all, certainly, but many of them, many of his novels, can be read as fables, and Death with Interruptions is one of those. The only question left for me is, what Saramago book will I read next? Another of my ongoing reading projects is reading all the winning novels of the Booker Prize by decade. I started this project last year and you can follow along if you like. I'm currently reading all the books that won in the current decade in order. Last month I read The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which won the Booker Prize in 2016. So far, I must say that this reading project hasn't introduced me to anything I've been wowed by, but The Sellout is the novel that has gotten closest to that. What a fast-paced, original book it is. I think that The Sellout is one of those love it or hate it books. It won't certainly be everybody's cup of tea. For me, it is a book that I admire more than I like, and I like it a lot. Let me see if I can explain why. So, The Sellout is a satire of race in America. Now, because I don't live in America, race relationships there are something I only have second-hand knowledge of. So it is possible that part of The Sellout's potential impact is lost on me. The novel is told in the first person by a character who defies any kind of pigeonholing or stereotyping. He's a black man who lives on a farm in an LA neighborhood called Dickens. The problem is that Dickens has now effectively become absorbed by sprawling Los Angeles. So the protagonist / narrator goes on a quest to reaffirm Dickens' identity as the city it once was. The way I interpret this quest is as a metaphor for re-establishing black identity in America. The Sellout is jam-packed with jokes. Many do land, others simply went over my head. Beatty's novel escapes any kind of reductionism or simplifying of one of the most complex issues in America, race. Interestingly, The Sellout was the first novel written by a US writer to win the Booker Prize. Traditionally, the Booker Prize, was only open to authors from the Commonwealth of Nations, Zimbabwe, or the Republic of Ireland. Basically, everywhere in the world where writers write in English except the United States of America. That rule was changed back in 2013, and now any book originally written in English and published in the UK can qualify for the Booker Prize. The year after The Sellout won, another US book, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, took the award, and I plan to read Lincoln in the Bardo in March, so you can read along with me if you like, and if you have Goodreads, you can also follow my reviews there. And talking about literary awards, this year I am a judge of the BookTube Prize. In fact, last month I read a couple of novels for the first round, and although the rules allow me to tell you the titles of the books I'm reading and judging, I'm not allowed to share my thoughts on them, so I'd rather not talk about those books at all. At least not until I can freely express my opinions on them. I think I should be able to talk about them in April, so you'll have to be a bit patient with me. So these are all the books I read in February. Let me know what you read, and also if you have read any of the same books I have read, let me know in the comment section down below. And if you're new to my channel and like what you see, please subscribe. I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.